Welcome to The Nature of Natural, a new podcast featuring the work of Tim McGaffic and a team of others dedicated to the study of behavioral science principles in the field of horsemanship, stockmanship, and stock dogs. I'm Julianne Neal, your host for today's episode, and I'm so thrilled to sit down with Tim for a conversation about the development of this philosophy and how he promotes the welfare, ethical care, treatment, and training of horses, livestock, dogs, and all animals through applied behavioral science. Tim, I am so excited about your podcast.
Great. I'm excited too. I've never done one, but we'll give it a shot, huh?
Well, I mean, everybody says podcast is the way to go. And I know from our conversations already, you are a born storyteller. And so I'm looking forward to learning more about your background, your history, and everything to do with your work. So, as I said, you have a rich background, a rich history in the field of horsemanship, low-stress stockmanship, ranch management. I mean, you've had this incredible career. How did you get started? How did you end up on this path?
Well, family had a farm. When I was a little kid, I stayed at the farm. And, of course, we had horses and everything. But we didn't ride them. They were work horses. And I always loved animals. I just loved them. And so when I moved back to Colorado and started working on ranches and got my own horses and rode other people's horses, I had been training dogs. I had been training different kinds of dogs, Schutzen dogs and some things. And one time when I was training these dogs, people had the choke collars and everything, and there was a guy who didn't have that, and I'd look over there and I'd say, I want to be like that guy. And so there was a vet who said, well, there's this guy, Ray Hunt, and he, maybe you ought to go see him. So I did. I went and saw Ray, and that was sort of the beginning of understanding, this connection and the philosophy and how to get along without, less coercion, and sort of in some way the horses understood better. And of course that fascinated me. And at the time I got a job as a pool rider in the mountains of Colorado. So for those that don't know, a lot of ranches go to the mountains with their cattle. Here in the West and public lands, they have permits, and in pools sometimes it's not just one ranch, it's sometimes many pools, many ranches that go together and put their cattle together, and then you move them around. And they had a thing called a pool rider, and that guy took care of moving them around, and if they were sick, doctoring them and making sure they were in the right spot and everything. And so during that process, I both was introduced to Alan Savory and holistic management, and this, the idea that there's a symbiotic relationship between the grazing ungulates and the flora and the fauna. And so the grazing management was a big deal under that philosophy. And at the same time, I kind of ran in this guy I didn't know him at the time. His name was Bud Williams. And he was sort of, if you will, the Tom Dorrance of stockmanship. And he had this incredible story. You can read about it. Go to his wife still maintains. He passed away. His wife maintains a website. I think it's stockmanship.com. You'd find it on our website. And his story is amazing. But he could do things with animals that other people couldn't, right? And the pull. And it was typical of the West, we'd have to move the cattle from one place to the other. We're talking, in the mountains that go from about an elevation about 6,500 feet to 11,000 feet. And, it was about in acres, it was probably about 300,000 acres or something like
Mhm.
that. So it was a long thing. You go through the whole thing. And, the typical way was that every neighbor that ever wanted to be a cowboy would show up on a day that we were supposed to move the cattle. And, the lane in front of the ranch would be just full of trucks and trailers. And I started working with Bud, and he could do this by himself. And so, I started, learning from Bud. And at the time, there was no really internet. And so I'd write him letters and draw diagrams. He'd write me back. uh, Went to his classes, of course. And so I started to, I was absolutely fascinated with it. Of course, it was really a lot the same as what you're learning about the horses. It's just
Mhm.
in sort of different ways, other than your way out with a whole bunch of animals. And so I just went to those people one day, and after about a year or so, I said, I'll do this by myself. I'll do this, for free if you let me do it by myself and
Huh.
not have every neighbor. And because you can't convince them that there's any other way, right?
Right, right. There's a history of doing it a certain way, I'm sure.
And well, yeah, hoot, holler, scream, chase, the whole thing, So they said, okay. There was one ranch was the head ranch because they had the most cattle. And there was a series of brothers that owned that ranch, the Gerard Ranch ranches. And one of the brothers, his name was Keith, and he was just a wonderfully kind guy, but he had like some, sort of developmental problem or something. He, worked on the ranches, and he didn't really make management decisions, but they said, you got to take Keith. I said, okay, we'll go with Keith. So Keith and I, and at the time now, I'm also learning getting stock dogs. I got rid of all the other dogs. I got border collies, started to learn about that. And of
Oh, wow.
course, it was the same kind of thing. I'm training all these things. Keith,
So you've transitioned to working with border collies for stock work.
my phone heard me
Mine does that all the time.
to give me some advice, which I probably need.
How
Uh,
funny.
but Keith had been going up there since he's like 3 years old, right? And
Yeah,
so he
yeah.
knew every little pocket because there was, some cows would go, take a few of their heifers and hang out in places that were. And so Keith and I would go, and we did it all by ourselves. And so as we started, you know, um, we worked with the Forest Service that was in charge of the permit, and try to make sure that our rotations were on time and complete, and no one went back. And we did. We were way more, and the dogs were a big part of that.
Mhm.
Because I had the first real good dog I bought him from a rancher that was Steve Allen's friend, and Steve is on the website.
Mhm.
Uh, and and then I got more dogs too because you can't use just one; it's too much for
Right.
just one,
I
going day
bet.
after day. And at the end of the year, weaning rates were up, 20 pounds, whatever. It's hard to say. Maybe it's a good year, from grass or
Mhm.
whatever, but we had almost no death rate, So I was sold.
Yeah.
And they were sold too, because
I bet.
so, because mostly because I was working for free. But I stayed on and did that for a long time. Then, I just, at the meantime, while I was doing that stuff in the winter times or time off, I would go see Tom and Ray and other things. And so that's really how I got into it. The story kind of goes on and on from there. But once I got down, that road and met those people,
Hmm.
decided those were my people, and I did that decision was those were my people because the horses, the dogs, everything said, yeah, we
Right.
like you, this way you're doing things,
It's
it
working.
works.
Yeah.
I didn't need 20 cowboys to move, 500-600 head of things. I could do it, because they
That is
understood what you were
incredible.
doing, the way you were approaching your angles, so forth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you talk about Tom Dorrance and Ray Hunt and all these incredible the legends for horsemen. These are big names, and so to hear you just spout them off like I've learned from Tom, Dick, and Harry. It's a big deal. It really is. But looking at, like you said, how it fit with the horses, it fit with your stock dogs, it fit with stockmanship and everything else. That really is a well-rounded body of work that you have.
If I got off work on a Friday night, I'd drive to California all night to see Tom. And I do the same with dogs. And, most people just didn't do that.
Right. Most people still don't.
And, and I'd drive back and go to work. So I was like smitten by these ideas.
Yeah.
And I'm still am, I guess. You
Yeah.
say, here I am, right?
Oh,
Talking to
and
you.
I
So,
definitely
yeah.
because these,
So,
these are stories that I think need to be told, and these are people that the typical person didn't have the opportunity to just drive and go visit Tom, and so I think this podcast is going to be an exciting way of hearing more about your experiences and obviously the training and the philosophy and everything else. And I think it'd be a good time also to mention I first met you because of a film project that was in the Equus Film and Arts Fest, Get the Mind and the Feet Will Follow, and your relationship and your partnership and friendship with John. I'd love to talk a little bit about that if this would be a good time to do it. He sounded like an incredible horseman in person, and I think y'all had a wonderful friendship. So can you talk a little bit about that and the project, the film project?
I didn't know John a long time ago, but at the same time, he was going to see Tom too. And at the time, he was still an actor and he would, get acting jobs and then go back and train horses and things. Oh, that was, and when his job, however that work quit. And then,
Hmm.
but, but he went to see Tom and Ray and people. And then because he was a film actor, producer, writer, he started to record things with Tom. He got, and they wrote a book. He wrote a book with Tom. He narrated a book with Tom. He did these things with Tom. So Tom was a big part of his horsemanship philosophy. Certainly it was the foundation of it. And at one point, he decided, and I'd have to get details on it because I don't know from his son or something. Then maybe we can have him on the podcast sometime, uh,
Absolutely.
if he'll if he'll come. Yeah. So John decided to use Tom's philosophy to train a Domo Vaquero horse. So John liked that discipline, and he did, and he went on to be national champion 4 times, I think, So, in that process, of course, you hear about John, and I think I sent him an email one time. I was asking him about the Seretta, right? And about using the Seretta with how, blah, blah, blah. And he writes me back. He writes me something I can't exactly remember, but he says, "Well, you'll figure it out. You're a thinking man." to to his dying day, I'd always tell, because I'd always send him these like suggestions, and like, "I've been thinking again, John,"
He's gonna throw that
and it
back
was
at
kind of
you.
like like, you should have never said that, right?
Right.
uh, but
You're a
anyway,
thinking man.
from that aspect, and in the meantime, in that process, we both uh became enamored with equitation science. I can't exactly say how John got there, but I was
Mhm.
asking myself, well, I know all these people, and I was also riding with some big performance horse trainers,
Mhm.
that, win the snaffle bit, and they were at the top of their games. And of course, their horses were real, real good.
Right.
And so I said, what's the commonality here? What is the same that works? All these things.
Mhm.
What's the unified principles underlying, say Tom's philosophy and theirs and whatever. And so in that way, I had always studied evolution and natural selection. And that was something I'd been doing for many years. So,
Mhm.
there was Andrew McLean. He had started, uh, at before he even started it, he started the International Society for Equitation Science. And he had written
Okay.
several books. The first was, I remember what the first one's name was. And I got that book and I read it and I said, well, these are the underlying principles. So I started, learning about learning theory and behavior, the evolution of behavior, the evolution of learning, different kinds of learning, because everything learns. Everything on this planet
Mhm.
learns something. Even slime molds have ways of learning. I mean, it's amazing. Uh, so that's how I got, then I evolved with equitation science, John too. So over time, we became friends, and um, we shared, of course, a common mentor in Tom, and that
Mhm.
philosophy. I had some difficult horses over time. As a matter of fact, I was making a living dealing with difficult horses because we had been in the beef business and we went bankrupt. And I didn't have any, like, got to do something. Like, so I started, helping people with horses. And so I'd always get people would bring me horses. So when I was introduced to learning theory, I started using different, positive reinforcement. Over
Mhm.
time, on my own, I realized that, what became known as combined reinforcement. At the time, there was no name for it.
Right.
Um, and it wasn't even written in the first equitation science book. It was written by Andrew McLean, Paul McGreevy, and several other scientists. It, said, basically pure positive reinforcement is great, except when you really have to, the horse leaves, you've got to have a way to deal with the pressure. And so they were, but at the time I'd already combined the two things.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, which was years later, and then only recently, the second book came out, and they have now studied combined reinforcement.
Huh.
And there's studies that show that combined reinforcement is the most effective way of training.
Hmm.
Um, and I could tell you a story about a horse named Dusty, and maybe I will, but I can't go on forever here, I suppose.
Well, I'm gonna make a note to come back because anytime you mention a horse's name, that piques my curiosity. So we can come back to Dusty.
So anyway, I started doing that, and I started, well, this is the same stuff as Tom. Tom said, he expressed himself in aphorisms, like,
Mm-hmm.
horse knows the horse knows when you don't know. The approach is all the horse has. Observe, remember, compare. So I called John up, and I said, and I had this Mustang, and I still have him. He's in that film thing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and he was a rescue. He was going to the sale barn, which most likely meant in this little town he was going to the killer. So I was using this process on him. And eventually I said, John, we could make show this process and equate it to what Tom says, to
Mm-hmm.
some principle he says that equates with a behavioral principle.
Right.
And so John came to the ranch, and I showed him,
Mm-hmm.
and he, thought about it. And after a while, he said, "Well, we gotta," because I filmed a couple of things, and they were just me standing out there doing it. And John said, "Well, we need this is good stuff. We need to
Mm-hmm.
make a film of it."
Right.
And so we did eventually. He got his son, who is a a production guy, sound guy, everything guy, sort of
Uh-huh.
thing. And that's the film we made. And
Right.
we
Right.
tried to go through it. Um, we wrote the script. John got it down to the movie version of
Right.
getting
Right.
getting me out of the equation. So that's how that happened. And then before John passed, just 2 weeks before, we had finished. We had finished filming. It's not edited yet. A film with all of John, not all, but many, many of Tom's aphorisms,
Mm.
and showing or saying that this is related to this behavioral principle, or
Right.
this is related to this. So that's where we're at today. That film should be done early July,
Okay.
when it's finished edited. His son is editing it, and he said he's got a lot to do. So that will be available too. And both those films are available on the one only right now on John's
Mm-hmm.
website,
Right. Right.
johnstryandt.com. Um, and we'll be able to use clips from that film for our
Fabulous.
podcast and everything.
Yeah.
I just have to get the hard copies onto a hard drive,
Right. Right.
but we can do that.
Well, that's exciting to hear because we want to keep up with all the stories, and I just know that from the first film, you did a beautiful job of pulling together Tom Dorrance's philosophy and talking about the logistics of it, but in a way that's easy for a beginner to understand. It's not that you have to be, a cowboy. It's for everybody, and so I thought you did. It was an award winner for the Equus Film and Arts Fest, and I'm sure for other places too. So you did such a nice job with it. So I'm glad that it's going to be available for anybody that wants to watch. But that then too, you have something else coming down the pike. So that's going to be fun.
To your point that you just made, one of the goals was and still is, only
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately without John, is to try to bring this stuff to the common person.
Mm-hmm.
So what we both found Well, as soon as you start spouting these terms, these scientific terms, people are like, what do you know. But we thought if we could equate them to somebody that they knew about or followed, such as Tom,
Mm-hmm.
or, there's going to be others too. Charles de Comfy even writes,
Right.
uh, a, he was a prolific writer. And there was one article I remember him saying, and this is science.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he was talking about some dressage
Yeah.
thing that he was, trying. I can't remember exactly what it was, but um, so our goal was to try to bring this to the average guy, so the average guy could understand it. And
Mm-hmm.
if they did understand it a little better, they would get along with horses a little better, and they would analyze the situation a little better maybe from the horse's perspective. Because
Right.
kind of view is if you really want to help horses, you better understand them. And you could go to, I mean, there's hundreds of these people out there now, and I'm not really familiar with most of them, but I gotta take a break here. The goat has
Okay.
just gotten into the house.
While Tim takes a minute to take care of the goat, we wanted to take a minute to tell you about some of the other podcasts in the JA Media Productions catalog. From the Equus Film and Arts Fest to A Mustang Story, we love visiting with authors, artists, and filmmakers with stories about horses. We also shared time with Lisanne Fear on the trail with the Mustang Discovery Ride and chatted with Bruce Anderson for Whinny Tales. You can find almost any type of equestrian content you'd like to hear in the JA Media Library. These podcasts and more are all available wherever you listen to your favorites. And now, let's find out what happened with the goat.
About that.
That's okay.
He pushes on the door. He's like a free range goat. He's my friend's sort of pet goat. Anyway, to pick up on that, it was like, so, if we want to help them, we have to help people first. And if we help them understand what horses are. And so, as we, not me, but as scientists research behavior, and particularly horse behavior, equitation, we really learn what drives them, how they perceive the world, what kind of levels of intelligence they have. Because intelligence, is only should only be measured from sort of the environment that they grew up in or that they evolved in. So, they're not designed by nature in any way to essentially, think rationally or solve problems. Sometimes, they don't have certain kinds of memories. They have experiential memories, but not the other kind. So those things matter when you are training them.
Right.
Because if you assume that if they can remember something that they just can't. They
Right.
don't have the physical mechanisms to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So when you gain that understanding, or at least some of that understanding,
Mm-hmm.
you can, go, okay, we can't do that. But, we can do this other thing, right?
Right. Right.
And
Right.
once you do those kind of things, they start to learn faster, and they're enthusiastic learners because you're starting to give them some agency, some choice.
Mm-hmm.
And as you give them a choice, that's, like, okay, I got a choice here. I can do this or that,
Yeah. Yeah.
But if I do that, it's not not great. But if I do this,
Worked out pretty
so
well.
so that's motivation, right?
Yeah,
So that
absolutely.
was our goal, to bring some of those ideas to the average guy
Hmm.
via these people that they may know,
Yeah.
like Tom Ray in the English world, Charles.
Hmm.
There probably are going to be others. Certainly, Andrew McLean will be in there,
Hmm.
um, and see who
Yeah.
comes up.
We'll see where else it
Nuno
goes
has
for
said
sure.
many things, or probably some of Nuno's aphorisms or
Hmm.
things he said. Although, yeah, there'll be those kind of
Good.
folks around, and then when you see what, say, Bud Williams, the stockmanship guy, said, and what,
Hmm.
say, Tom said. Now, these two guys didn't know each other, right? They just worked with animals, and so Bud said, keep the animals in a learning frame of mind. Uh, and then Tom said, no, Bud said, keep the animals in a normal frame of mind. Okay. And
Okay.
Tom said, keep the animals in a learning frame of mind. So that's true. And when you look at science on that, a little bit of stress is good. That helps motivation, but too
Yes.
much takes you out of the learning frame of mind.
Right.
So,
And I think that's the interesting thing is the insight that you have on that and being able to compare those two statements at that deeper level. I think that's pretty exciting. I think your listeners and your audience will be really, I would imagine the audience that we'll have with this podcast there'll be a lot of horse people. So not to say that they're all going to be horse people. You might have some stock dog aficionados. You never know, but being able to take a deeper look, a deep dive into some of the thoughts from these old masters and the legends in our world. That's going to be exciting. It really is. Yeah. Well, and I'll say we're probably next time in our next episode, we're going to do a little bit deeper dive into the film because I've got a couple of questions about that. And so would love to hear more about plans for it and of course your plans for summer. But in the meantime, you and your team at the Nature of Natural have put together a fabulous website. So if people wanted to look into that now, you have sort of a Grand Central Station type of space called the Hub so they can learn more about upcoming events, find articles, find older videos. Tell us a little bit about that and what all people could learn just from the website in the meantime.
as you point out, there's the hub was just, something so people could start to, essentially what we're trying to do is connect the dots. And what we found over time is people don't connect the dots very well. And previously I said, well, people say this is English or this is Western. Uh, there's no dot connection there.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so now we're expanding the puzzle to connect the dots on a bigger thing. So there's research in each thing, and there's people in each category that are saying the same thing, much like I
Mm-hmm.
just pointed out with Tom and Bud.
Mm-hmm.
And Julie Hill would be our stockmanship go-to or dog person. She's from Scotland, and her uh, training philosophy is called the natural way. And it's based on how, like when I just said about learning about how horses are in memory, well, she does the same with dogs. And so she, operates from that perspective. She's won the international, the only woman to do so. She's won the international brace about, I don't know how
Mm.
many times. Oh, she's very good. So that's why we have the hub, that you can jump around depending. I mean, we'll probably concentrate a lot on horses because that's how maybe the majority of people will have a horse or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, because a lot of people that have stock have horses too.
Sure.
Uh, and some of those people have dogs too. So,
Mm-hmm.
but almost all horse people have dogs,
Right. That is
whether
so
it's
true.
a corgi or a Jack Russell or something, you see them running around
Or a blue
everywhere.
heeler. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So
and
they'll
there's
be
a
able to
lot of
find things
research
on the
there that'll
website.
be going up over time. There'll be more videos posted. Um, they just haven't been uploaded or edited enough to upload yet. And it'll be in the progress there. And so there's research articles, and then there's some fundamental reading lists that if a person wanted to study it, they should maybe read some of these books or articles, and it would help their understanding.
Great. Well, and we'll, in the show notes for this episode, I'll be sure and put the website so people can just click on that link. But, and I have to say also, because when I say the team, I always say the team at the Nature of Natural, because one person can't do it all. I know from working with my partner Bruce Anderson, we each have our things that we do, and so when I talk about your team, I would be remiss if I didn't say Jenny is a big part of being able to put the website together and having access to all those things. So, hey, a little shout out to Jenny. Tell us a little bit about what she does behind the scenes.
Jenny, she is the administrator, but she's also kind of the manager, marketer, all those sort of things. But in her own world, she's quite the horse person.
Mm-hmm.
She was a student of Charles and many other people. She, Kotos, Arthur Kotos. I can't even name them all, right?
Right, right.
But her and her husband owned a large guest ranch for many years. They had 150 horses and a bunch, like 80 guests per week or something like that. I don't know. And so she has a lot of experience with horses. She's quite the horse person, advocate, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately for me, she's also better at the computer stuff than me. So we'll get her on here right away
Yes,
and see,
absolutely.
what her 2 cents are, because they may be different. They
Well, I will
usually
look forward
are.
to that conversation because I'm sure she can give you, as you're giving us some of the stories that you remember, I'm sure she can give us some of you as well. So that'll be
Yes.
fun. I'll
Yeah.
look forward to talking to her.
Yeah.
So, but in the meantime, if anybody who's listening or watching, since we're putting this out in video and audio versions, be sure and go to thenatureofnatural.com to learn more, to find the hub, to see some of the videos from Tim and John. And so it'll be interesting to see where we go from here and to see, is there anything you want people to know as we close out the first episode? I'm excited for your first episode of the podcast. Any parting words before we close?
Well, no, I look forward to getting your feedback if there is any feedback from the audience. Um, I would hope that you go to johnstryan.com's websites, perhaps join his school. I forgot
Mm-hmm.
how he put it. And if this podcast has triggered something in you, we're open to hearing from you. Call, text something, and we can set up times to talk, whatever. And that's about it.
That's great.
Till next
Yeah,
time,
I'm
right?
hoping you'll get a lot of good feedback from this first one, and we'll tailor things from there. But I do want to say in our next episode, have some questions about the film, and we'd love to hear a little bit more about your plans for summer because you're right in the middle of a big move. You've got a Mustang Summit coming up in Colorado. got the conference in July, and plans after that we can go into later too. But anyway, thank you for taking the time today to sit down with me, Tim, because I'm very excited for you and for the rest of us to learn a little bit more about your work.
Thank you for taking the time to interview me. It certainly is helpful to have a guide. Thank you.
Well, we will see you next time.